I'm often asked, why are there so many birthing better skills? And the answer is we have a lot of questions about our birth. What are the questions that you had about your birth, or about your coming birth, or about the births of your friends? There are a lot of questions because the reality is there's no way to know what your birth is going to be like. And that leaves all of us perplexed. And after the birth, there is a phenomena. The memories of our birth last our lifetime. So these are the skills that we developed so that our birth stories, or after the birth, were at least reasonable because we tell that birth story to ourselves, sometimes to our children, and to others over and over and over and over again. And so how did this one skill set after the birth develop? Sometimes the skills developed because of one woman or one man or a couple's persistence about an issue that really had a negative impact on their birth. Remember, women are the only ones doing the activity. And if your husband or partner or loved one is with you, they're seeing you and hearing you do the activity. Many times we believe that women are the only ones impacted by the birth experience. But the reality is our whole family is impacted by our birth experience. If a woman's unhappy because of her birth experience and doesn't look back on it with any kind of acceptance, much less pleasure, that impacts all relationships she has with her baby, with her partner, with her extended family, and friends. Sometimes birth stories actually destroy friendships. So when we're looking at the skills around after the birth, we have to think about how did we get to after the birth? And the reality is we didn't get to it from doing the activity of birthing our baby. We got to it in pregnancy. As I've said in lots of the videos that I'm making, when I gave birth first in 1970, the first ever childbirth preparation classes were taught. They were Lamaze and Bradley method, and they were all over the United States, everywhere. We were all taking these classes and going into hospitals with huge restrictions, no choices, and we used our breathing and relaxation skills with our husbands as birth coaches. And we, the multiple millions of us, we reduce suffering, which is the second global childbirth goal. Every culture recognizes that women can suffer in childbirth. No culture wants that. If you are religious, some of the holy books talk about women suffering in childbirth, as though that's something we have to do. No, we don't have to do that. It's because we do not have a collective set of birth and birth coaching skills to use to work through the activity of giving birth. So after the birth stories start in pregnancy, we either are going to prepare for birth by learning skills, or we're not going to learn skills. We may be privileged to have choices, and we may be preparing for birth by making choices in a birth plan, but for 99% of the women in the world, they lack choices. And for women who do have choices, by and large, most choices change. But we're left with doing the activity. And this is what's been so hard to convey since the 70s. And what Birthing Better Families want you to know. The Lamaze and Bradley skills were the beginning of skills-based methods. Think about what if. So what if birth skills like Lamaze and Bradley had been targeting 100% of pregnant women rather than only low-risk women? What if? How would that have changed things? The fact is, we all took their classes, yet we knew that the skills were targeted to low-risk women. What if those skills, the goals of those skills, were just for women to cope better, manage better, work through, deal with, handle, stay on top of, and feel in control, and that was the primary job of the birth coach, just help us cope and manage better? What if that had been the goal? Well, then we would have set to that goal, wouldn't we? Because we would know what the goal was. However, the goals that Lamaze and Bradley in the beginning of the natural birth movement advocated for those skills was for low-risk women to achieve a natural childbirth, pain-free labor without medical care. And all three of those, and three together, were challenging to achieve. First of all, nobody had defined what the word natural was, because if we think, oh yeah, I know what it means, it just means a spontaneous labor and delivery. The baby comes out. Okay, what if it comes out dead? What if the woman dies? What if she bleeds to death? What if she tears through the rectum? What if it was so painful she thought she was going to die? Those are questions. And what we discovered was that nobody understood the word natural or normal or even physiological. And yet we throw those words around as though we're all in agreement. But we're not in agreement because the word natural birth does not mean that it's a good outcome necessarily or a bad outcome necessarily. And what does pain-free mean? Is pain just subjective? Well, to some degree. And is fear what causes pain? Well, no, it isn't. I've worked with many, many women who have been absolutely terrified about giving birth, and they just spit their kids out without medical care. Do you believe that modern women, the majority of modern women, really would like to birth without any care around their pregnancy or birth? That's an illusion. Maybe a few do. But when we're talking about after the birth, how do we produce a awareness after the birth that our birth experience has been reasonable, perhaps good, perhaps excellent, and hopefully empowering? We do that as a decision we make in pregnancy. And it's hard to make a decision when you're not being given the choices. And it's not the choices of whether you birth at home or in the hospital with a midwife or a doctor. The reality is since the 1980s, women have been actively discouraged to learning skills. And father's role as a birth coach was totally obliterated into fathers just supporting women's choices. So men were denied the ability of really being able to assist the woman work through the activity of birthing her baby. And what about women who are having cesareans? Over the years, I've heard natural birth advocates, and I've had women say to me, my friend told me that my cesarean wasn't a real birth. So what are we doing to each other within the mummy wars? It's not a good look. So when we're pregnant, we have a choice. And that choice is to become skilled or not. And our choice is for our birth partner to become skilled or not. Leave your birth provider out of it. They're skilled. That's their role. That's their job. That's their task. But you as a pregnant woman, you have one task, and that is to do the activity of getting your baby out of your body. And your birth coach has one job, and that is to help you do it in a way that your birth memories that after the birth leave you feeling positive and leave them feeling positive. I can't tell you how many women I have heard over the 50 years talk about how useless their husbands or partners were during the birth. And then after the birth, they pushed the man away from his child because he's all thumbs and the disappointment of what happened at the birth. That's an after the birth story. Those are feelings that impact families for years, sometimes cause separations and divorces. He wasn't there for me. Well, how do you expect him to be there for you if you don't share a set of skills and work together? So what should a good after the birth story sound like or look like? And there are lots of different ones. There's no one good birth story or no one bad birth story. But what you're listening to really are four elements. You're listening to when birth started. We hear that a lot. My water broke at 3 a.m. I gave birth at 11 at night. So we hear that. That's common. We also hear what they did and didn't do to us. That can be positive or negative. It can be our partner or care providers. My midwife got sick and couldn't make it to my birth. The nurses in the hospital were very kind to me. Or the doctor was really rough. Or my husband was wonderful. Or my husband was a jerk. Or I had to do the birth on my own and nobody was there to really help me. And then the third element is about women themselves. I had terrible back labor. I pushed for hours. The birth was so quick I thought I was going to die. Those are the three common birth stories that you hear women tell. I had a cesarean, I had a vaginal birth, I had a home birth, I had a hospital birth. All of those are part of those three elements of birth stories. But during the Lamaze period, we had a fourth element, and that's what we did and what our partner did. So birth stories from my generation could sound like this. I didn't particularly like what happened in the hospital. They fiddled with me a lot. But I was really glad I had some breathing skills. They really helped me. Or, without my husband there coaching me, I just would have curled up in a ball and thought I was going to die. Do we have empowered births when we have lots of assessments, monitoring, procedures? Well, Birthing Better Families did, because that was one of the questions and goals. What if I have tubes coming out of every single one of my holes? How am I going to have a natural birth? What if I have a cesarean? How am I going to see that as a birth, given the conversations people have? I wanted this kind of a birth and ended up with that kind of a birth. How do I explain this to people in the future? So we did two things. We created the concept, which is it's an activity you're going to do. 100% of women have to do it, and we should all be skilled to do it. And we developed an extensive range of skills that respond to every single nitpicking question that we had. And one of those nitpicking questions was, after the birth, what kind of a story am I going to tell about my birth experience after the birth? And what we found was the most impactful part of the story was that fourth element that's now missing. Is what I did. That's what women wanted. I did, right? So often you would hear women say, the second time I gave birth, I really focused more on my breathing, or I focused more on relaxing, or I didn't get into labor as quickly. I just got on with life, and I only really focused on it when the contractions got really intense. And it's how they perceive of their partner as well. He was really there for me. He really helped me breathe. He really helped me relax. He seemed to know what I was feeling. I couldn't have done it without him. He was wonderful. We are entitled to having a good birth story after our birth. Yes, entitled. We are entitled to that. But we can't reach that until everybody understands that giving birth is an activity each woman is doing by herself with her baby. No matter where she births, no matter who's present at the birth, no matter her circumstances, no matter her choices or lack of choices or change of choices, no matter her beliefs, and no matter what happens to or around her. Once we are skilled, we have the capacity to use our skills as our birth unfolds and look back on our birth knowing that we worked well through the activity. And the first thing you say after the birth is, we did it. And he's glowing, and your care providers patting you on the back and saying, you guys were great. Consider how those birth stories grow over time. And this is why we develop skills around after the birth.